Hi, this is David Wolinsky back with another interview from the audio archives of Don't Die. This time I'm bringing to you the second half of my conversation with Pippin Barr, a game developer and academic. We spoke on April 7th, 2016, and if you'd like to read a full transcript of this conversation, check the link down below in the description, and also down there you'll see a link to my Patreon where your support helps me continue with this project. Thanks. But I don't know how much you pay attention to games media or media. Yeah, I'm curious because that. Well, I think it makes sense, sort of in the way that Seinfeld game came together. Like how it got covered and who got top billing. Mm-hmm. No offense to you or to Jason. But what do you feel like, when you look out at games media, like what sort of stories do you feel like you never see?
Oh, yes, I might be. I might be pretty weak on this just because I'm typical of, I guess a lot of people in that, because I spend all my time making games, I barely read about them or play them. What do I not? I don't know. I do feel like I see. Maybe because I guess I get most of my links to writing via Twitter, and I guess I follow specific people. Like I feel like I see a real diversity of coverage, but that's probably not reflective of what's really out there. Like it's not like I go to Kotaku every day and see what's up on Kotaku. The only site that I guess I would actually go to is Offworld, which, does have a whole bunch of different perspectives.
Yeah, well, it's not around anymore,
No, but it's a book now, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, a Kickstarter. Again, capitalism.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. No, I guess I in my little bubble, it all seems like there's lots of representation of different kinds of ideas, but I'm sure that's totally not representative of the larger environment.
So, why did you decide to sort of stop doing criticism or to trail off or to back from it?
Partly it's just I guess I felt like I didn't have time, even though that's not true.
Well, I think people sort of discount how much time it takes to soak these things up and then think about them and then write about them.
Yeah.
If you want to get money for it, trying to place it somewhere.
Yeah,
so
get money.
It's incredibly time intensive.
That's a different thing if you want to interface with capitalism in that way. I don't know. Yeah, it's pretty aligned with starting to make games. But there was a good period where I was making games and writing about making games, which I spend every day full of regret that I'm not doing that more now, because I think it's a good perspective to have out there. So maybe that's something I feel like I don't see as much as people who make games writing intelligently about what they're doing beyond, it's not tutorials or kind of marketing, but just thinking about why they did things or what was difficult or behind the scenes things. Robert Yang, I think, is a really good example of somebody who writes very interesting things about the actual process of making a game and why he did what he did, why the games turned out that way. And I guess I aspire to doing more of that. I've done it in the past, and I thought it was interesting. And again, narcissist that I am, that's why I would write about these things.
I don't know that it's always narcissism. I think you're trying to figure it out, right?
Yeah.
It's
a feeling out process.
Yeah.
So I guess I don't want to be the person who's like, oh, it's been a while since I wrote on this blog, but here I am every day. But my objective is to get back into that. I just drifted away, I guess, because it's hard. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was trying to pick up the thread here, but I've seen, and I'm sure you've seen too. There's been sort of a rise of video games in museums. Integrated in any number of ways. And this is actually something I saw. This is how we sort of. I was aware of you before, but we sort of triangulated on each other through a Twitter thread with Liz Ryerson.
Right.
Liz was tweeting about this sort of rise of video games in museums, and I think it's an interesting thing to think about whether it's hard to tell sort of which is lending legitimacy to which.
It's definitely symbiotic. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm curious. I mean, I don't want you to declare a winner, but I mean, just what are just sort of your thoughts or things you've noticed about like games starting to show up in museums and?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I feel like museums are probably winning. If I had to guess.
How so?
I mean, I think that them being able to at least, claim, like, I think it's been pretty unsuccessful in, the actuality of what it's looked like. Like at least they get to say that they're engaging with this culture, and you can have a big video games show, and people will come to your museum whether it's good or not, or interesting or not, or fair to games or not.
Yeah.
People can't resist. Like if there was one in Montreal right now, I would have gone to it, just because you want to see how that gets done, and younger people want to see a medium that is such a huge part of their lives represented in those kinds of cultural institutions. So it works for museums, I guess, in terms of getting people through the door.
Do you think video games are getting sort of a short shrift in their representation? I mean,
not intentionally.
Through this, like it's capitalism all the way, but it's also this weird sort of someone always thinks they're doing it better or more correctly than someone else. Where this is one of the stranger email threads I've had in my life, where the Library of Congress was sort of telling me the ways that they felt that the Smithsonian wasn't doing right by video games.
Oh, that's an interesting conversation.
And then the Smithsonian had read my interview with Library of Congress and emailed me about, like, you just wait until we talk. We're going to tell you. It's just like, this is...
Oh my God, that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's amusing and interesting. And so
it's nice they're invested to that level of, like, a street fight. That's great.
See, that is a video game I would play, is Smithsonian versus Library of Congress. But I think what Library of Congress was asserting is just... and maybe you don't run into this so much with your work and what you read, but there's a certain gated quality. I mentioned this before, to just sort of knowledge about games and information about games, and the Smithsonian sort of took the position of we have video games like in a museum in the Smithsonian. That's a huge victory.
It's a big deal
for video games. Yeah. But Library of Congress is like, but there's a lot of just information that is not there that is knowable, but just they're not allowed to have it.
Not allowed to have it.
Well, maybe that's a little
like, you
extreme.
Mean information, what sort of behind the scenes, you think?
Yeah, right, exactly. Okay. I mean, it's sort of, in the way game companies are, it's proprietary information and NDA'd, and they don't, for whatever reason, want to let it out into the public.
Yeah.
So, I would sort of posit, like, it's in the Smithsonian, but it's not as informative as it could be.
No, it's a pretty minimal step. And I guess that's why I would say that the museums are winning is, they can do that and get vast media attention for having done anything, but then the games themselves are, it's not that interesting to just pop a game in a museum and say, well, there you go, like, consider this, because games, I guess they don't really lend themselves all that well to that situation in the first place. Like isolated in the white cube or something, they lose a lot of how they mean things and how they are thought of as being experienced and what they were made for. I had an interesting conversation with Maddie Bryce about this, where we were talking about exhibiting work and like what's it. How would we want certain of our games to be exhibited? And it's never like, I want a controller sticking out of a wall and a TV screen, where somebody, stands there for 2 seconds and then moves on, because that's not how a game feels interesting. And she said, yes, I don't want to like steal her thunder, because I think she was going to put that online at some point, or maybe she has.
It'll be a few months probably before this goes up. So you can tell me and we can take it out later.
Sure, yeah. But she was talking about. I'm currently blanking on the name of her. Her most famous game that I guess. But the one where you're going to the cafe and you're walking through the streets and it's made in RPG Maker. I guess I could just look it up.
Yeah, that's okay.
but that game anyway. That she thought of this idea that it would be exhibited where you sat on a couch playing the game, but there was somebody sitting next to you who would kind of be judging you and judging how you played the game, like a real person. And I thought that was, that sort of thing is obviously is blurring into the world of performance art and stuff as well. But yeah, arguably, kind of intervention for it to make some sense.
Yeah, I mean, arguably, a lot of video game culture is like that now. I mean, it always was, but a lot of it does exist now where you're streaming it,
right?
And there are people. Yeah. There are people, I guess, judging you.
Yeah,
is one way to describe it, or they're yelling at you, or whatever. But that isn't presented as part of the. I mean, it is part of the performance, but it's sort of like that's like. I mean, I guess saying that like the chairs in the movie theater is part of the movie.
Right. Yeah.
Is that a metaphor that makes sense? I hope so.
Probably you can leave it up to the readers, and if you get complaints, I didn't.
I think main thing is you agree with me. Yeah, no, I mean that's interesting.
Yeah, I really like the idea of games being in those spaces because I think that they can be. But yeah, it seems like it's a long way from that working yet. I curated a game sort of exhibition is the wrong word. It was sort of like I don't know what it was. There were a bunch of games. We had a bunch of games at this event called Arcade 11 here in Montreal.
Is that the thing a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah, fairly recently.
Months ago, yeah.
Where I chose the game, so I was the curator, which makes it sound very highfalutin. And it's hard to to present a video game to a crowd of people who are going to pass through rather than, the usual experience of having it in your home and experiencing it that way. And there were some, I picked games that I thought would work in that context because they were, usually multiplayer and things like that. But that's not most games, and I guess I would like it if it were possible to work out ways of displaying other games, especially like, I guess, single-player stuff in the museum context that would help people kind of get it or see a larger meaning to the game. And I quite like, I've had this sort of feeling that it would be really interesting to kind of reproduce a domestic setting in the museum space as a way of kind of, it's a little bit like Maddie's Couch, but like I was thinking more, installation-y, I guess, where, you go into a bedroom or something and there's a game on a computer in there and you play it, and that would kind of help people kind of understand a little bit more about what it feels like to encounter these things if they're not if they're not going to play them themselves at home.
So this is also going to be sort of thinky, but for people who don't follow games, maybe you touched on this with your shelf thing, but I mean, whether we call it a medium or an art or whatever, I mean, what do you feel are types of explorations that are possible in games that you just couldn't do in another form?
I mean, usually the big call to arms is interactivity, I guess. But that's bigger than games, of course. But I think that for the moment, games largely have that kind of that mantle of being the interactive art form. That's why I still call all of my stuff games, even though, I mean, a lot of it probably doesn't pass muster as really being a game. But there's a nice Trojan horse effect that if you call something a game, people are a bit more likely to try it, even if it's not remotely fun or anything close to that. So I'm certainly not.
I mean, yeah. You had mentioned like in our email too, like it's sort of what the function of that word even is.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you've sort of embraced it as a you said Trojan horse.
Yeah. This is what gets all of the I post a game in the Reddit web games forum and like get all of these people who they turn out to have a horrible experience most of the time. But they still played it, and they encountered that thing, which I think I like to think is good for them. It's like cod liver oil or something. Right. And some of them are quite upset afterwards, and this wasn't fun, or this wasn't really a game, or what's the point of this? So to a certain extent, I guess what I was really trying to communicate missed them completely, but at least they took a look at it. And game gets you that in a way that, I don't know, interactive art or something totally wouldn't. Like, those people, I don't think, would be interested in looking at something with a different label.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to people about this before, and this is also very broad, but I mean, that's that sort of question you raised of, like, what's the point? Like, do you think people just expect too much from video games? We do see this thing, with some levels of toxicity in the audience, but also just sort of that expectation that video games are sort of this panacea of like everything they want it to be, and people have theorized to me like, video games are an unusual medium because the creators make their rough drafts available to the media before it's really done, and people build up these expectations and over this like runway of a year or two. But I think like that's one way to think about it, but I also like wonder, like, do people just sort of do they look for games to mean more than they might a book or a movie or a TV show?
Gosh.
I mean, is there a certain intensity to that, you feel? Like, I mean, just like why does a game need to have a point? Like, isn't it a game? Isn't it like it distracted you or it got you out of your head for a little bit? Isn't that sort of the point?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I don't think it would be more so than other media, except I guess that maybe weirdly games they're kind of in the ascendancy right now in terms of being the dominant art form. Yeah, which is, it's so weird to think that's come to pass, but it does seem to be the case, right? That they're bigger than movies, and obviously everything's bigger than books, so they're bigger than books and bigger than any other thing, TV or whatever. Even though it doesn't feel that way when you look at, I guess, representations of culture right now, but they are.
Well, I mean, social media is a game.
Sure.
A lot of things like that's just sort of the model, and I don't think we realize it. But it's not like you're going to go on Metacritic and look and see what the review of Facebook.
God, that would be, somebody should get on that though. Seriously, is that not there? Yeah, I mean, well, maybe you and I should discuss doing that later on.
I would be open to doing
that
if you
reviews,
wanted.
Right? It would. I guess it would come up. That'd be fantastic.
I would seriously, if you want to talk about that.
Because you see things like that on Amazon, of course, as well, like those kind of weird, pranky reviews. Yeah, it would be fantastic to move that on to, something like Metacritic. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's good.
We can talk about that. Thank you.
Okay. But do people expect too much? I don't know. I mean, people get excited, and there's definitely, like, I'm always cautious about thinking that things are new because, like, there's always going to be the argument that things have always been this way. But it does, like, maybe blockbuster culture has gotten a lot bigger over the last decades, I guess. I don't know. I was listening to an interview with the director of The Exorcist today, who was talking about how that Star Wars was a paradigm shift, like the transition from silent film to sound or black and white to color, because it brought in the concept of the blockbuster movie, and that movies since then have kind of been trying to remake Star Wars over and over again, obviously including very literally the most recent Star Wars.
Including the remakes of Star Wars.
Yeah.
Yes.
But like maybe that's a cultural thing, is like there's this whole massive hype around the new thing coming out, and even indies are obviously trying to kind of reproduce that as well. Insert capitalism here. And maybe the expectations are those kinds of expectations of like people being very excited and invested in media franchises and so on. Yeah,
I mean, I think like we just don't have enough data on like
that's
fine, let's say like they are expecting too much, but who are these people and what's going on in their lives, and what's gone wrong in their lives, and what do games mean to them that they don't mean to other people?
It really hasn't gone on for very long.
Yeah, I mean, Star Wars is an interesting example because before Star Wars, if I know my stuff correctly, people were saying sci-fi, doesn't sell.
Right. Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. I think that was I think people didn't think Star Wars was going to be what it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so weird. Yeah. And like, before Star Wars, don't know, the idea of just like these huge movies that it's commonplace to think of.
Oh, it's reported on in the news.
Exactly.
It's treated as very important.
Yeah, when it's while it's still coming soon, or this summer, or 3 summers from now, or that incredible. Have you seen that Marvel blueprint of like the extension of the franchises into the like 2020, 2030? And it's amazing.
This morning I finished transcribing an interview I did with a comics writer, contrasting games culture and comics culture, and I asked him, like, how does that sort of how does how do you not you Pippin, but you David, not me David, but his name is David. Just sorry, that was needlessly confusing. But I asked David, like, how do you feel that sort of impacts the types of stories people want to tell when they know what the blockbusters are going to be for the next 6-7 years?
Amazing, yeah.
I mean, isn't that crazy to think?
Yeah.
And how long ago was Star Wars? It wasn't that long ago.
76.
It was within our lifetime, or within some people who are still alive lifetime.
Yeah, that's right. The last
where they're trying to get the victory.
Died, yeah.
Well, they're trying to get the victory lap of another trilogy, but
well, they're going to.
I mean, that's a modern phenomenon, but it's not like, I mean, people, I don't know, the whole like video games are bigger than Hollywood. It's like, well, but they're not reporting like what Call of Duty sold.
The media
in the
doesn't. I mean, they do as a kind of novelty, I guess. Yeah, but it's not. It's not. It hasn't reached that kind of penetration. I don't know why. That is. It's kind of weird. I guess it's because they don't have, like, films at least had the history of being taken seriously by the media.
Yeah.
At one point, and still are. Some films. Whereas games, I guess, have just never had that. And maybe, I don't know how they're supposed to break through. Comics are in the same situation, I guess.
Yeah, well, they have all the same problems, culturally speaking.
Yeah.
Just sort of the weird culture wars.
Including Gamergate.
And the workforce problems.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I didn't really ask you about Gamergate stuff. I always feel weird even bringing it up because A, I don't want to legitimize it. B, it's 2016 and it's sort of morphed into being something else. But
I guess it's still with us, right? But
yeah, well, it's become something else. But I mean, I guess I'm curious. Does that aspect of game culture, does that sort of surprise you that has taken hold? Like, is that a thing you remember seeing seeds for when you were growing up with video games? I don't know.
I guess not. I guess I didn't notice, but I mean, I am also, straight, white, middle class, etc. Male, etc. So I mean, like, obviously things were tuned to me the whole time. Actually, I was reading, do you know Line Hollis?
Name sounds familiar.
Yeah, she writes these really hilarious, she plays old Sierra games, and kind of like she generally kind of hates them, which is fantastic because I love them. Like the old Sierra games it's kind of my go-to thing for nostalgia, and especially Police Quest 1 and 2. They're like my thing. And she played Police Quest 2, and despite, like she said, she has never hated a game more than Police Quest 2. But she pointed out all of this stuff about how kind of gross it was in terms of its representation of women, of racial things, of like the kinds of things that the hero does very nonchalantly, on and on. And it's this really problematic game, and so is the first one for similar reasons. And I sure as hell didn't notice that when I was playing it. I love those.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think it's been around. It's just weird that people are like so up in arms about preserving it. I don't completely understand.
I've been watching just very randomly last week and a half. I've been watching a lot of musicals.
Oh, interesting.
I think probably just as a sort of automatic reaction to just the amount of time I spend talking to people about video games, is actively trying to, broaden my media diet.
How do you watch them like filmings of musicals, or?
Oh no! I mean, it's like it's productions.
Oh, you're going to them.
No. They're just
like a movie of a production.
Film versions of musicals. Sorry. I saw Rent a couple of days ago. I just saw Bye Bye Birdie, and it's funny. You do, not funny, but it's similar to games where you just anything from like the 50s and 60s. They're just
unless it's
really
being reimagined. Yeah, it's like
That's just like, oh, that's really racist for no reason.
Yeah, and that's the whole feminist frequency. You know, you're allowed to enjoy these things, but I'd like at a certain point, like I actually find it pretty hard to enjoy them. To be honest, like it's just not good.
It's galling and distracting. But okay, well let me just ask you a couple more questions. You sort of mentioned that like there can be this quality to video games where they can be mindless. And maybe you remember saying that, maybe not. But
sounds reasonable.
I mean, for people who don't really follow video games, like what does that actually mean? Because I think most people still think video games are mindless. You know, you read those things about like, you know, someone just completely disconnecting from the world around them, and they're just, you know, tapping buttons. But what does video games being mindless mean to you?
I mean, I'm experiencing it. I probably will be experiencing it later this evening when I tune back into Fallout 4, which I really don't like it, actually. I've been getting surprised reactions from a lot of people around me when I say that I don't like it, but
I would be curious to hear. I don't know how closely you've been following my stuff, but tomorrow, the interview going up tomorrow is unusual in that, like, I was rereading, I was like, oh yeah, I kind of forgot, like, I explained to someone from Ozark Softscape, like, what Fallout 4 is and how it works.
Interesting.
And
I'd like to read that. That'll be good.
It's the same thing. It's kind of boring.
But you do it. Like, I mean, it's clearing these like buildings of synthetic people, and I'm just killing them. And crawling around on my knee. It always feels like I don't know what you think of yourself as doing in stealth mode, but I always feel like I'm crawling around on my knees, which seems really bizarre. But
carrying way too much. And
but it's the mindlessness is just, you know, that's that wonderful game loop that, you know, people are busy designing to make it, you know, juicy and exciting and addictive, and it totally works because like I find it insanely boring, but I keep doing it hour after hour.
Well, I think it's similar. I mean, I don't know that it's necessarily like a different kind of mindless than like, you know, when you go to Amazon or Netflix and you're just spending all your time looking for something to...
Browsing as a kind of activity. That could be unrelated or scrolling Facebook or something.
Yeah, well, it's just, I feel like a lot of our interacting with screens now is like turning it into like you're in a casino now and you're not supposed to pay attention to the clock.
A little red marker telling you that new things have happened. And
so we'll include this in our review of Facebook.
Of course, that's going to be great. But that's, I think, the mindless thing. And sometimes it's totally what you want. Like, I mean, I think especially if I feel a bit depressed or like stressed out by life, then it's not the worst thing to sink into, you know, blowing up people's heads for a while. I mean, well, video game violence aside for the moment, but it is dull though.
Well, I feel like that's something that's gotten sort of shaved off of, you know, what it means to quote unquote be a gamer or to be a video game player is these sort of time loops you're talking about as ways to distract ourselves from times when we're depressed or we feel like not wanting to connect with other people. Like, you know, just as easily as you can have an album that helped you get over a breakup, I'm happy to volunteer myself. Like, I can probably think of like times where a game or two games total have gotten me through, you know, like just a really horrible breakup. But that's kind of like, it's a good, you know, like, it's like, well, what's the point? I would never think like, what's the point of a video game? The point of the video game is to help you get over, you know, a girlfriend. Like, I would never expect that.
I'm not going to ask for that, Although, again, that is quite a great idea for a game, or at least an advertising idea for a game. Yeah,
but, I mean, I think like that's like, I think mindlessness has this connotation to it, but it is...
It's not purely pejorative, no.
No,
But we're always like everybody talks about their media consumption as if it's always meant to be, you know, very smart and educational or something. But of course, like hardly any of it is.
Well, okay, so I'll ask you two more questions, and one of these is about criticism, which is, you know, we talked a little bit about just, you know, I think there's a rise of, you know, very intellectual style analysis of video games. Do you ever get a feeling? I mean, it's no different than like, you know, these pieces you see on BuzzFeed about like, you know, what Game of Thrones teaches us about whatever. I mean, do you ever feel like when you read that stuff about video games that it is it ever overreaching? Is it saying things
like
that you think are not actually
kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know. I mean, it depends on what you think that the critic is meant to be doing, I guess. Like, I mean, if they're meant to be uncovering what the person who made the game was doing, then I guess, yeah, for sure, sometimes they are, they're finding things that, you know, in a sense aren't there.
Right.
Like, I actually had that experience in a very positive way with Evelyn, which was the most recent game I made, which was, it's about writing, it's about being a novelist / short story writer, and you end up, you're actually writing work by James Joyce, a short story called Evelyn. And the person, Richard Goodness, he wrote this really great blog post about it. And he comes from, you know, he's someone who's studied modern literature. And he actually was reading the kind of the meaning of the short stories themselves. So the short story Evelyn, and I also include a reference to Moby Dick, as being kind of about the game, or that the game was kind of reflected in those literary works. And that's, maybe there's some tiny chance I was smart enough to think of that subconsciously, but it was not part of, you know, it's not remotely part of the plan. But the way he wrote about it, it's like, wow, yeah, that's there. That's accessible as an interpretation that's legitimate. So he was wrong in the sense that, you know, I guess if his job is meant to be to work out what I was doing, he got that wrong. But if the job of the critic is to, you know, to use the game as a way to talk about things, then he got it super right, in a really interesting way.
Yeah, no, I think for me it's just, you know, you never really see in video games the way you see in other mediums. Although we did talk about it before, so maybe you do, but like just a general, like, you know, like one of those, you know, hyper dramatic critic and criticized, you know, verbally sparring publicly. Like you never really see that in video games. You just sort of hear, or at least I've heard it in my career, of just, you know, companies very quietly emailing people.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so you know, just taking issue with or challenging, or sometimes legitimately, you know, like, okay, what can we actually learn from this?
Oh, wow, yeah.
So I think just because it tends to happen in such like a quiet loop, I just sort of wonder sometimes, like, okay, well, when are they actually just sort of overreaching versus like what's the reality? But you know, obviously, I wound up doing this, so there's a different type of critique or criticism that started fascinating me. So it's not at all knocking criticism. It's just like, I just kind of wish we could know some of these things. This is an unknowable thing, and this will be our last question. What do you? What do you think video games have accomplished? Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, well,
you can take issue with that wording, or you can go wherever you want.
Golly, I mean, I'm glad that they exist. Again, mostly for selfish reasons. Like, I mean, when I started, like, I've always been a person who has made things since I was a kid. I mean, it's not that surprising when you're a kid, because, you know, kids make stuff just naturally. So I used to draw, and then I became a writer of terrible teenage poetry. And then I kept going. You know, it's just that's the ultimate test of your, you know, your poetiness is, can you get beyond the death poetry of your teenage years? And I did. And then I wanted to be a novelist, and like I said, I've always been very driven towards making stuff as central. I'm sure this is true for you as well, but very central to what I think of myself as being as a person. But when I started making video games, it was like a very eerie kind of clicking together of all of the things that I felt like I cared about worked in this medium in a way that it hadn't been working in any other medium. So I guess, like, from my very personal experience, I feel like they've accomplished, you know, what video games accomplishes. They feel like they are different from other ways of expressing yourself, and that, you know, like being that medium is a huge accomplishment, I guess, because it's presumably allowing a lot of people to say things that they couldn't have said otherwise.